The real co-ed killer, before Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, before the term serial killer was even a term used by the public. Michigan's now infamous killer was making national news in a 2-year period time. John Norman Collins launched his one-man assault against young women in the Washtenaw County in southeastern Michigan between 1967 and 1969. He is known as the co-ed killer, the Michigan murderers, the Ypsilanti killer, and the Ypsilanti Ripper. Maybe you never heard of John Norman Collins and his brutal crimes, and that's because they were swept under the nation during the trial over in Los Angeles. Overnight, Charles Manson and his family were breaking national attention. What is up, you guys? It's Jessi Maee, and we are here with a very special treat. I'm going to be bringing you, obviously, a true crime video. I am so extremely passionate about true crime. It's really the only thing that I ever consume on YouTube. There's a fruit fly. And so I just thought I'd give it a try. So if you are into true crime and also kind of like vlog style content, because we are building a tiny house, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and hit that little notification bell so you don't miss any of the uploads. I'm going to try and bring you a true crime video at least once per week. If you guys enjoy this and you find any value or entertainment, or you just really want to show support for the channel, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up, because like I said, it just shows your free support as well as subscribing. Really quick, I was going to break this video into parts, but me personally, with the amount that I consume of true crime, I hate it when they're in parts. I would much rather have like a 3-hour video and be able to pause it whenever I want, instead of having parts. And so this is probably going to be a long video. So let's just get on into it. Please kindly and respectfully let me know in the comments if any of the information I have is incorrect, and we can have a discussion about it. I mean, absolutely no disrespect when covering these cases. I collected the information from the sources linked below to create this video. Thank you guys for watching. John Norman Collins was born in Windsor, Canada on June 17, 1947, the son of Richard and Loretta Chapman. John was the youngest of 3. He had an older brother, Jerry, and a sister, Gail. John's father, Richard, was a light infantry officer and an explosive demolition expert in His Own Majesty Canadian Services. Sadly, he lost his left leg in 1944 during World War II. Living on medical the rest of his life, Loretta divorced him, allegedly extreme mental cruelty. She did admit that him losing his leg was part of the reason that they got a divorce, but also the extreme mental cruelty, so we weren't there. We're not exactly sure what happened. As well as this next part. Many sources said Richard was an abusive alcoholic. According to John Norman Collins' cousin, John Philip Chapman, Richard was never abusive towards Loretta or their children. Loretta would tell her kids untrue stories, and then the kids didn't want to be bothered with their father. Hoping to avoid dragging their children through a bitter divorce, Richard gave Loretta what she wanted: full custody. Loretta struggled to raise her 3 children on her own, working various jobs. Shortly after she divorced, she remarried, to whose name is unknown, but that marriage only lasted a year. In 1951, Loretta left Canada with her 3 children for Centerline, Michigan. It's about 30 minutes north of Detroit, and married for the 3rd time to a William Collins, who formally adopted all 3 children. William turned out to be a violent alcoholic and beat his family. John's stepfather once threw him across the car at his mother. On another occasion, at the age of 4, William used John as a shield when he was confronted by another man with a gun. At the age of 5, John was still wearing diapers to school, and he had a bedwetting problem. Loretta and William would leave John and his siblings in the car for hours while they were in the bar drinking. That sounds lovely. Loretta later divorced William in 1956. By the age of 9, John had 3 father figures with a great deal of DV. As his mother worked as a waitress, she formed yet another relationship with a man. No more is really known about that. I'm assuming she just either didn't get married or just, yeah, I don't know. Nothing more. I couldn't find any more about that. I couldn't even find his name. John went to a Catholic school, St. Clement High. He was described as a polite and handsome man, very popular in school. He was an honor student, tri-captain of the football team, president of the C Club, and was a star pitcher of the baseball team, also was a part of the wrestling team. John had an obsession with motorcycles. Side note, he kept all 4 of his motorcycles running with stolen parts. So basically, all 4 were stolen motorcycles. In 1956, John enrolled in Central Michigan University, and after a year he enrolled in Eastern Michigan University. Eastern Michigan University comes up a lot, so if you catch me just calling it EMU, Eastern Michigan University. He enrolled at EMU to major in education to teach the upper elementary grades. Scary for what we're about to get into. College wasn't much different than high school at first. Collins became the vice president of the ski club, played sports, and was in the Theta Chi fraternity. He was later expelled out of that fraternity of suspicion of stealing. His teacher says he was a quick, alert student, but noticed that his grades declined by the second half of his sophomore year. John should have graduated in 1969, but was 24 credits short and made no attempt to make them up over the summer. During his sophomore year at EMU, one professor accused him of cheating and he began committing petty thefts, often just for thrills. That is where he met Andrew Manuel, who later becomes a partner in some of his escapades. Collins had a large sexual obsession. Several girls reported how he could fly into rage at the smallest things. He even quoted the Sixth Commandment at one girl who danced provocatively for him. He was Catholic, although he made a few remarks that provided potential motives for some of the killings. One former girlfriend remembered a time when Collins had walked her across the campus and began to touch her. Suddenly, he held her away and angrily asked if she was having her period. She admitted she was, and he yelled, "That's really disgusting," and then stormed off. Like he could smell it. Ugh. Another co-ed recalled riding with him near some wooded area, and they stopped under a tree to rest. John asked her if she would be scared if he was the co-ed killer, and that's when she could be the next victim. She thought he was kidding, but the serious expression on his face made her uneasy. Another girl who said she met a man who looked like Collins remembered him saying that he couldn't stand girls with pierced ears, and that is, quote, because they left holes that defile their bodies. He also told her that once he strangled a cat with a clothesline, and that to make his point, he put his hands around the girl's throat. Some women described him as a bondage freak, and this may be from an incident when he found Gail, his pregnant sister, in bed with another man. Collins beat up the man unconscious and then hit Gail, calling her a tramp until she bled. What a great brother. Collins also expressed some ideologies that bordered on the psychopathy. Characteristics are lack of guilt, remorse of empathy, pretending to feel emotions, inability to form true emotional attachments. They tend to be successful but dishonest, and they are very manipulative, narcissistic, and have a superficial charm. Collins had a necrophiliac obsession too. He told a girl that if a man had to kill, he killed. If he decided it was right for him to do, then he had to do it. The perfect crime, he told her, was when there was no guilt. Without guilt, a person could not get caught. He said something similar in an English paper. And this is going to be a direct quote off of his English paper. If a person wants something, he alone is the deciding factor of whether or not to take it, regardless of what society thinks may be right or wrong. If a person holds a gun on somebody, it's up to him to decide whether to take the other's life or not. The point is, it's not society's judgment that's important, but the individual's own choice of what will and intellect. Now we're going to get into his brutal crimes and some alleged crimes that may have been possibly tied to him. We will get further into the detail, but I am going to give you a small warning. Some of them are extremely graphic, and also we are going to pretend that we don't know who the killer is right now, even though you and I know it's John Norman Collins. I mean, so going through the victims, the police don't know who the killer is, so that's how I'm going to portray the rest of the story. Mary Therese Fleszar was born on December 4th, 1947, in Willis, Michigan. 19-year-old Mary began working as a secretary at the Eastern Michigan University Field Service Office. Mary majored in accounting. From the friends and family who knew her, they said that she was a lovely person and a devout Catholic. Mary would sing and play the organ at her church services regularly. Her close friends said she was essentially quiet and a private person. She was by no means a party girl who was reserved and naive about men. One friend said about Mary when asked if they knew anyone who'd want to hurt her, she answered, "No one." Mary was a lovely person, sweet and good, one of life's innocence. On July 9th, 1967, at 8:30 p.m., Mary went for a walk and vanished from the campus of EMU. Her family said her going missing was complete out of character, but they didn't want to pry because she was an adult in college. Mary was last seen approached by a blue and gray Chevy on Ballard Street by her neighbors, shaking her head no. It was clear that the driver was harassing Mary. The driver then sped around the block and tries to stop Mary by pulling up aggressively into a driveway, forcing her to walk around. Mary shakes her head no once more, and the car was seen driving off, and Mary walking out of sight towards the direction of her apartment, never to be seen alive again. Mary's unclothed body was found on August 7th, 1967 on the Scottney brothers' deserted farm near Geeds and LaForge Road by two teenage boys. Small warning again, graphic detail coming. Mary was stabbed 30 to 40 times in the chest and abdomen, 20 of which were for something sharp like a knife, the rest were irregular. They could have been from insects or feral animals, as she had small teeth and prints on her flesh and exposed bones. Mary's feet have been severed above the ankle. The pathologist believes her bones was smashed as there was no evidence of sawing or cutting on the ankle bone. Her thumb and sections of her fingers were missing from one hand, and the forearm on the other side have been severed. She had also been slashed across her back. It is unclear if she had been sexually violated. Her face was unrecognizable, and her remains were covered by the elements for 2 months, only identifiable by her dental records. The investigators searched the abandoned farm and dug through piles of soggy cardboard and found clothing stacked beneath on a packing crate. They found an orange dress with white polka dots that was torn down the middle. The zipper was still zipped. Investigators also found a white bra with ripped shoulder straps, a pair of white underwear ripped at the seams, and a piece of white cloth that was suggested it was a pad, like a menstrual pad. Part of another strap was found on the trail about 10 feet from the wet, moldy clothing. Covered in insects, it was a right tan sandal size 6.5B. Maee was killed elsewhere and dumped. It was clear that the killer came back to the scene of the crime several times. And also note what we talked about earlier, we know who the killer is, but John Norman Collins had a necrophiliac obsession, at least I read in several sources. So, him coming back to the bodies, doing who knows what. Also keep that in mind, him coming back to the bodies. Days later, a young man showed up at the Moore funeral home that was holding Mary Fleszar's body for her funeral service. The visitor asked permission to take a photograph of the body, saying it was for a keepsake for Fleszar's parents. The employee on duty, Harold Bitton, told the visitor no, and when asked why, Harold replied, quote, "Because that's a disgusting, creepy fucking request and the body was decomposed." The visitor replied, "You mean you can't just fix her up so I can just get one picture of her?" The man left without a word after being told a no a second time. Harold described the visitor as a white male, 18 to 20 years old, 5 to 10 medium built, with light complexion, wearing a long-sleeve shirt with no tie, black pants that weren't cuffed, and he had white papers sticking out of his pocket. He had on loafer-style shoes, and he also added that the visitor didn't have a camera with him, but he drove off in a silver bluish-gray car. How you gonna take a picture with no camera? According to the Michigan State Police, the Fleszars had no knowledge of him, so they didn't send him. The Ypsilanti police tracked down every blue-gray car, and everyone had an alibi. The police concluded that the murderer was just passing through. Almost 1 year later, Joan Schell was born on December 1st, 1947 in New Paris, Wisconsin. She was a 20-year-old whose family moved to Plymouth, Michigan. I'm not exactly sure when. Joan was an art major at the Eastern Michigan University and lived on Emmett Street in Ypsilanti. So I'm not sure where to add this, but knowing that we know who the killer is, directly across from the street lived Mr. John Norman Collins at 619 Emmett Street. Joan was last seen alive by her roommate, Susan Coble, on June 30th, 1968, at a Washtenaw Avenue bus stop in Ann Arbor when she missed the bus. She was trying to visit her boyfriend, Dale Schultz, who they were secretly engaged, when a red and black Pontiac Bonneville containing 3 young white men stopped. The driver had dark hair and parted to the side and asked, "Want a ride?" Later on, an eyewitness believed the driver to be John Collins. Remember, he lived across the street from her. Susan tried to tell Joan that it was a bad idea, but she went anyway, promising to call her and assuring her a safe journey as it was only an 11-minute drive. 3 hours later, Susan reported Joan as missing. July 6, 1968, days after getting into the red car with the 3 young men about 20 miles away from where Mary's body was found, outside of Ann Arbor on a construction site with little to no effort to conceal the body with just clumps of grass, Joan was found with her blue miniskirt twisted around her neck, sexually violated, and stabbed no less than 47 times, with her throat slashed with a knife about 4 inches in length. Several wounds punctured her lungs, liver, and carotid artery, with one additional infliction behind her left ear traveling upwards into her brain and fracturing her skull. And her spinal bone was cut at the back of the neck by so much force. Mary's autopsy, done by Dr. Hendrick, noted that there would be 4 pints of blood missing from all the wounds. No pools of blood were found at the scene, indicating she wasn't killed there but moved. He also noted the body was incredibly clean, considering, as if she were bathed prior to. No, her body had been placed where it was found in less than 24 hours. Part of the body was still fresh, as if it was preserved, while the upper part was black and leathery as exposed to the elements. In addition to the outstanding similarities between the wounds inflicted upon Joan's body and those inflicted upon Mary's, the previous year led investigators to establish a definite connection between both murders, and 4 detectives were assigned to work full-time on both cases. Police sought out the registered owners of more than 150 red and black vehicles in the state of Michigan and established the alibis of numerous men who matched the description of the driver Cobo had provided. All leads went cold. Collins was brought in for questioning. He denied knowing Joan even though he lived right across the street from her and provided an alibi for the weekend of her disappearance, saying he was at his mother's house in Centerline and he had not returned to Ypsilanti until the morning of July 1st. Police took his word and never checked his alibi. He was a personable, clean-cut young man with the goal of becoming a teacher, so no one thought seriously that he might have had something to do with these brutal murders. He sent the detectives on their way with a friendly, quote, "Sure hope you catch that guy." Dale Schultz became a suspect quick. He was AWOL from the military, and he was released when he passed a polygraph test, even though we know nowadays they're really not liable. He was also visibly distraught when he heard about Joan's murder. Just note that polygraph tests are really not admissible in court, but back then they relied heavily on them. So, now we have two jurisdictions. Mary was found in Ann Arbor and Joan found in Ypsilanti. We have two separate detectives with no connection yet, like, not really, like they kind of think that they're connected, but there's really no physical evidence connecting the two cases. There was a reward totaling of $7,800, which in today's money is about $66,383, for the information leading to the conviction of both homicides. 8 months later, Jane Louise Mixer was born on February 23rd, 1946. She was a 23-year-old from Muskegon, Michigan, a high school valedictorian. She was a freshman law student at the University of Michigan, committed to change the world. She was one of the 37 women in her class out of 420 people. People who knew her said that she was a trusting and compassionate. Her niece Maggie said Jane was so many things I wanted to be: driven, disobedient, brilliant, independent. She also read a page from Jane's journal from 1966. I'm gonna make sure like I'm actually reading it, even though I'm reading half this whole thing, but you know. For a world that demands direction, I certainly have none. Will I be a teacher? Will I go to France? Really, I don't know how smart I am. And that, above all else, keeps me working and working hard. Bill Wiseman, Jane's fiancé, said, quote, "Whatever she got involved in, she was extremely passionate about." On March 20th, 1968, Jane was trying to get to her hometown, Muskegon, to visit her family. She was eager to inform them of the news about her engagement and plans to move to New York after school. She posted a note on the college bulletin board. According to Phil, the note read, "Ride wanted to Muskegon, Thursday. Call Janie," with her phone number and address. Back then, you didn't really think twice about putting your phone, well, the phone number is fine, but your address on the bulletin board, because everybody then was more trusting and less fearful. Jane told her parents she would be leaving Ann Arbor around 6 p.m. and expected to arrive around 9:30 p.m. A person giving the name of David Johnson responded very quickly to her note and said that he would be leaving for Muskegon at about 6:30 p.m. Jane agreed to meet him at the Law Quad. At around 7 p.m., Phil, Jane's fiancé, called to ask and see if she had left. Jane said she was still waiting at her room. An hour later, he tried again with no answer. Around 11 p.m., Jane's dad began to look for her down I-94 with growing concern. Later that night, early morning, Jane was murdered. On March 21st, 1969, a 13-year-old boy was walking to his school bus stop when he noticed a shopping bag set. The boy looked inside to find a blue-wrapped present, college notebooks, typed reports, and a birthday card. He brought these home to his mother thinking they were important. His mother insisted that they return them where he found them, at the Denton Cemetery. The mother sent the boy back off to school, and she went to go return these things. Back upon looking at the bag, she spotted a dark, gooey substance. It was blood. Arriving at the cemetery, she discovered on top of a grave a fully clothed girl covered with her own yellow raincoat and a copy of the novel Catch-22 by Joseph Heller placed by her side. Jane was shot in the head twice with a .22 caliber pistol and strangled with nylon stockings that did not belong to her. She was not sexually violated. It is assumed that was the motive, but when the killer pulled down her tights and exposed a menstrual pad, the assault stopped and she was killed around 1 a.m. on March 21st. Police investigated the fiancé Phil, who didn't know that she was dead, but only missing at the time. When they informed him of the horrid news, he was visibly shaken and disturbed over her murder. He was released. The police checked all David Johnsons in Washtenaw County. Every small caliber gun the police came across went to ballistics. They test fired and compared with the recovered bullet fragments. The gun the killer used was never found. Jane was killed elsewhere and placed on the grave. There was a lot of speculations that Jane was not connected to the other victims because the location was far from where the others were. If you look at this map here, you could see this is where Jane was found compared to the other two. And because she was fully clothed and Jane had not been beaten, stabbed, or mutilated. The garment around her neck and the proximity of her abduction led investigators to link Jane Mixer's murder to Mary Fleszar and Joan Schell's. 5 days later, another construction worker found their worst nightmare. Marilyn Skelton was born March 4th, 1953 in Romulus, Michigan. She was only 16 years old. Sadly, Marilyn ran with the bad crowd of known users and sellers. She was engaged to Michael Millage, who proposed to her on her 16th birthday. One friend who had been good friends with Marilyn described her as an AB student, a musician who played the clarinet in the school band and was active in school. I'm going to read a quote here that her friend said, "There wasn't anything that Marilyn couldn't do, but last summer she started to fade away and become involved in smoking marijuana, and she became a speed freak." Another friend said that Marilyn took karate lessons with Sharon. Sharon said Marilyn was a third-degree red belt karate expert. She was pretty good. Mike charged her with a knife once as a test, and she threw him on the ground, almost breaking his wrist. I imagine whoever attacked her was pretty big or had a weapon of some kind. Upon Googling, because I didn't really know too much about karate, if this is the case for her anyway, because it doesn't specify like what exact, I mean it just says karate, so it could, anyway. In karate, the red belt is reserved for exemplary masters of the art and is actually above the black belt. She was a third-degree red belt, so in my opinion, from reading, she could probably kick some ass. On March 23rd, 1969, around 3 p.m., Marilyn phoned her friend Sharon from a payphone that her father just dropped her off at a gas station at the corner of Carpenter Road and Washtenaw Avenue. Marilyn asked if she could get a ride, but Sharon had no transportation, but said that she'd meet her at McKinney Student Union. Marilyn said that she would hitchhike the 3 miles to Ypsilanti. Back then, hitchhiking was normal. A lot of people did it. You didn't really think twice about it and the dangers that would come to hitchhiking, getting into a stranger's car. Back then, the world was a little bit different. That night, Marilyn was never heard from or seen alive again. This part frustrates me. Not that it probably wouldn't have had helped too much, but this next part frustrates me. Sharon tried to put in a missing persons report, but the police refused since it was out of their jurisdiction. The Michigan State Police refused to take a formal missing persons report because it didn't come from a relative or a parent. Sharon tried twice to file a missing report for her friend, only to be turned down. The next day, Sharon and Michael, the fiancé, went to the Michigan State Police only to leave angrily and convinced that nothing would happen. At this point, Marilyn had been missing for well over 24 hours and still no missing persons report was filed. On March 24th, Marilyn's mother downplayed her daughter's disappearance because Marilyn has ran away numerous times, but she's always returned. She also told the state police that she didn't understand why Michael was trying to get a missing persons report because Marilyn had a problem with narcotics and she was traveling to Ypsilanti because she owed some hippies some money. Mrs. Skelton half-heartedly phoned Wayne County Police and finally put in a missing persons report for Marilyn. Sadly, it was too late. Marilyn's body was found on March 25th around 11 a.m. near Glazer Road in Earnhardt. She was just a few hundred yards from where the body of Joan Schell's discovery site was only 8 months prior. Marilyn's nude body was found behind a vacant house on a remote rural section of Earnhardt Road. Crime scenes noted that there was a dramatic increase of the injuries. That's your warning for this one. I really didn't give a warning for last one, but yeah. One investigator described the injuries inflicted upon Jane was the worst that he had seen in 30 years of police work. Marilyn was thoroughly bludgeoned to death. Her right eye socket was crushed, her skull was cracked in 3 places, and her face had massive bruising and lacerations. A piece of blue cloth was shoved down her mouth, practically covering her face. She had a garter belt wrapped around her neck, and printed across her breast were marks that could have been from restraints to hold the victim. Remember, she was a third-degree red belt. She had restraints to hold her as he whipped her torso and upper legs with a leather belt. An 11.5 branch was savagely rammed into her vagina, leaving 7 inches protruding, and evidence reported that she had been beaten with no mercy with a belt before she died. Next to her were her clothes. A white bra was found over her head with one of the straps. A blue windbreaker was lying under her butt, and a few feet away from her were a pair of brown loafers, a torn pair of light blue underwear, a used tampon, a pair of jeans, and a torn portion of blue t-shirt. Her screams were muffled with a piece of her own blue clothing. Evidence shows that she may have attempted to escape. There was blood splatterings and churn soiled close to the crime scene, which indicated that she had been beaten close to where her body was discovered. Her ears were pierced, but only the right had an earring. Along with the missing earring was missing a brown leather pouch-style purse with brass eyelets, a long drawstring. A black wallet with her ID and approximately $30 should have been in her purse. Marilyn was also wearing the diamond engagement ring Michael gave to her on her 16th birthday, none of which were found with the body. Since Marilyn was a known user, dealer, and occasional police informant, some investigators believe that her murder may have been drug-related. Her father, Archie Skelton, was a suspect at first. He had been known to discipline her using a paddle. After a polygraph test, although proven to be a liar and a bully, he was innocent in his daughter's murder. His alibi checked out. An Ann Arbor police chief linked Skelton's murder to the series nonetheless. Police were stunned as there was no trace evidence of any DNA, no semen of the killer, only that of Marilyn's, which no she was not on any drugs at the time. That tells me that it wasn't drug related. I don't know, in my personal opinion, I just felt like I needed to say that. Going forward a little bit in time, in 2009, Michigan State Police took new evidence. They took photographs of the contents of her purse, which I don't have that here, but somebody found her wallet in like a small ravine, and inside her wallet it had like a little card. It said, "If found, please call Mike." So she called Michael, and that's how the police now got this this evidence. I believe it was in 2009 when it was found. That's why they're taking the pictures of it now. I had to throw that in there so you didn't get too confused. They took the photographs of the contents of her purse. Items included things like lipstick, keys, sunglasses, and a change purse. Along with Skelton's personal items was a small photo album. The collection of photos had messages from friends written on the back. One said, "Marilyn to a really cool girl with a swinging personality. Good luck with the guys. ABC Frank." Another one said, "Eternity, hours fly, flowers die. New days, new ways. Pass by, love stays." Another one said, "Marilyn, sick. To a girl who is both sweet and had a great personality. Good luck in the future, Terry." So now we're in 5 jurisdictions where the murderer had abducted or disposed of the bodies of the victims. Investigators exchanged information on an irregular basis. No coordination to combine efforts and resources were until the 3rd victim was definitely linked to the series. By April, each law enforcement agencies collectively assigned 20 investigators to exclusively work on the 4 homicides. Other than eyewitness descriptions and forensic reports, there was little to no physical evidence. What police had in common with the victims were, all the victims were brunette white girls. Each excluding Jane Mixer had been beaten with a blunt and/or bladed object prior to their murder. Each victim was found with a 15-mile radius of Washtenaw County. Each victim, again excluding Jane Mixer, had a knife wound to their neck. Each victim had an article of clothing tied around their neck. Each woman had been menstruating at the time of her death. All these factors led investigators that 3 of the 4 murders were from the same person. It is now starting to rain, so if you hear a little rain or a thunderstorm, sorry. Enjoy. Make it spooky. I don't know. 3 weeks after Marilyn, Dawn Louise Basom was born on November 28th, 1955 in Ypsilanti, Michigan. She was only 13 years old and in the 8th grade, and the youngest of the victims. Dawn was athletic and energetic, described as a tomboy. She loved to wrestle with her older brothers, which possibly led to her putting up a struggle and resisted to being captured, which led to her awful, horrendous, and torturous murder. Dawn got along with her family and had no trouble making or keeping friends. From one of Dawn's classmates, and I'm going to read the quote here, "Dawn had many friends and was popular at school. She had a unique bedroom decorated unlike any I have ever seen. There were huge decals of guitars and record album covers stapled everywhere. She had a large poster of a guy who resembled Elvis. Dawn's mother let kids come over to their house and listen to music. Dawn had lots of slumber parties. Dawn loved to dance, and Mrs. Basom let us have chaperone mixed parties of boys and girls. Dawn was a sweet 13-year-old girl who looked older than she was." Dawn had a high IQ of 133, but her grades were only slightly above average. Gerald Schlecki, her homeroom teacher, said, "Dawn was a wholesome girl who associated with a nice group of kids. Her principal at West Junior High, Harold Goodsman, described her as an average to good student with a happy disposition." On April 15th, 1969, Dawn was given a ride by her brother-in-law at the corner of East Cross and River Street in Depot Town to meet up with a 17-year-old boy named Earl Kidd. I guess he's not really, but he's still a boy. Dawn was wearing a white plastic jacket, a white cotton blouse, and an orange wool sweater and some blue nylon stretch pants. Dawn was leaving her friend's house near EMU with Earl, promising her mom that she'd be home before dark. At around 7:25 p.m., Earl and Dawn were about to part ways when he asked her if he wanted him to walk her home. Dawn declined, knowing her mother wouldn't approve of his age, and it was barely a mile away from her home. On her walk home, Dawn saw 2 of her friends fishing on a small footbridge over the Huron River. After talking for about 5 minutes, she asked them if they would walk her home as it was getting dark. The boys declined. Dawn was seen walking alone alongside the Penn Central Railroad tracks. It was a shortcut to get to her home on LaForge Road. A 31-year-old train bluff seen her around 7:35 p.m. walking alongside the tracks, and then the train pulled out on schedule. That was the last time she was ever seen alive. Dawn's body was found the next day less than 150 yards from her front porch, near Galen-Veerland Road in Superior Township. She was half naked, wearing only a white blouse and a bra, which was pushed up around her neck. Dawn was strangled with 40 inches of electrical wire that was left knotted around her neck. She was stabbed repeatedly in the chest and genitals, slashed across her breast, buttocks, and stomach. A ripped-off piece of her blouse was found stuffed down her throat. Investigators found no definite evidence of being sexually violated, but showed possible presence of semen from a vagina swab. Glass particles found on the bottom of Dawn's shoes were similar to those found in the basement of an abandoned farmhouse. About a third of a mile away from Mary Fleszar's body was found almost 2 years earlier. Sheriff Harvey and his deputies were searching the farmhouse. There they found Dawn's orange sweater along with further pieces of her clothing, a coil of electrical wire, the same one used to strangle her. Also in the farmhouse was fresh blood. For the first time in 4 murders, police had discovered their first murder site. Forensic investigators only found partial finger and palm prints, which were unable to match to Dawn's, meaning it was the killer's, but the police still didn't have any other leads. Other items found at the abandoned farmhouse were 2 large boards with footprints on them, a piece of white cloth, and a pair of size 42 blue underwear. Not Dawn's. They also found various fabric fibers, 1 gray button, 4 white buttons, and numerous pieces of broken glass with blood splattered on them. Near the back of the house was 8 2-ply tissues containing a crusty yellow-white substance, which was later tested to be semen, and what appeared to be pubic hair that was not Dawn's. Note, the doctors were certain Dawn was not on her period. Maybe it's because she was 13, maybe she just wasn't on it. She's the only one that was not menstruating. 3 weeks later, on May 6th, officers returned to search the empty farmhouse for the second time. This is where they discovered scraps of Dawn's blouse and a pearl earring that was deliberately placed. The killer began to taunt the police. On May 13th, 1969, only 100 feet away from the abandoned farmhouse where Dawn's murder took place, a barn was set on fire at 3:17 a.m. Superior Township Fire Department allowed the fully engulfed barn to burn to the ground, but prevented the farmhouse and the cellar from catching fire, only to receive water damage. Ypsilanti Press reporter John Cobb found laying there, perfectly in an even row on the driveway to the farmhouse, 5 clipped purple lilac blossoms. Investigators theorized the murderer placed them there to symbolize each victim. On May 15th, Michigan State Police arrested Ralph R. Kress, a 21-year-old student at EMU, at his apartment in Harper Woods, Michigan, which was on the same street as Dawn Basom's house on LaForge Road. Coincidence? I don't know. Unable to post his bail at $5,000, he was sent to the county jail. Police say Kress admitted, along with his roommate Clyde Surreal and one other companion, name unknown, had set dry hay on fire in the barn loft with no reasoning as to why, except they were drinking. They were charged with arson but cleared of any involvement with Dawn's murder. Question. This is my own personal question. The lilacs and the other evidence. How do you explain that? My theory, just allege, maybe somehow John, because we know it's John, this killer, maybe somehow he paid off Kress to burn down that so he could taunt the police. I don't know, or maybe it was just a huge coincidence. Let me know your theories down in the comments, because I can't really wrap my head around this one. I feel like some way, somehow, they were tied and the police didn't look into that. And upon researching, this is heartbreaking, but 6 of Dawn's classmates bore her white coffin to her grave. So 6 13-year-olds. That's gonna make me cry. Less than 2 months after Dawn's murder, Alice Elizabeth Kalom, born on December 25th, 1947, in Middlebury, Indiana. Alice was a 21-year-old student who lived in Kalamazoo, Michigan, who took a course at the University of Michigan in design. She graduated May 3rd with a degree in fine arts with a B average. A neighbor remembered Alice as a friendly, wholesome-looking girl with a vivid imagination. The apartment she lived at, the manager's son said she was a quiet girl who was interested in photography. The only complaint he could remember was that she used a bit of water when developing pictures for her film class. Her father spoke of his daughter as a fine, nice girl. Others said she was a quiet, studious book reader who didn't seem to date much. One friend said she was quiet and a real likable person. A high school teacher said Alice exercised very quiet leadership and she was a very conscious student, a very serious one. Her high school principal described her as warm and friendly, but at times reserved. Alice was last seen walking home towards her apartment on Thompson Street after a party at the Depot House in Ann Arbor, where she was last seen dancing with a young man with long hair. She was carrying her new purple dress shoes because she didn't want to get them wet wearing her loafers. She also had on a multicolored horizontal striped raincoat. If it was obvious, it was raining that day. Alice's body was found near an abandoned barn near North Territorial Road in US 23. She was partially undressed. She was wearing a purple blouse that was torn open and small pieces were cut out of it, and a pearl-type button was missing. She had been wearing large dangly earrings that were 3.5 inches long. One of those was still in her ear, the other was behind her head. Her black bra was cut in front of her, dangling loose on either side. Her black slip had been cut at the waistband. Her white miniskirt was found next to her with a boot print and blood on it. Her pantyhose were cut at the thigh and crotch area. A pair of mini brief underwear was cut up into several pieces and stuck between 2 toes on her right foot, and her purple shoes were missing. Alice was reported to have been sexually violated, repeatedly skewered, her throat slashed, and a bullet fired into her brain. It was apparent that the bullet passed through her thumb first, so she was like going like this. Alice was killed elsewhere and dumped with her clothing scattered around her body. After Jane's father identified her body, he spoke to the reporters, lashing out at the University of Michigan. I'm going to read this quote. "I don't want her body. I want her alive. I didn't come here for the body. I'm not going to claim her body. I'm going to tell them, the public, not to go to this university. It's too big. They don't give a damn about anything but money and politics. I'm not going to bury her. Let them bury her on the president's lawn. I've worked too damn hard to raise her, to send her here. I don't want her dead." The next day, she was laid to rest at Mount Everest Rest Memorial Park in Kalamazoo, Michigan. Just a side note here, the bullet resembled the same rifling specifications as the bullet removed from the earlier victim, Jane Mixer's. Thought to be the third victim of this serial killer, it was impossible to get an opinion whether the same weapon fired both bullets due to the extreme damage of Jane Mixer's bullet. Police tried to catch the killer for 2 years. A task force was formed. Dan Meyer from Michigan State Police Chief of Detectives was in charge. He had 50 detectives from 5 areas of police agencies: Michigan State Police, Washtenaw County Sheriff Department, Ann Arbor Police, Ypsilanti Police, and the Michigan University Campus Police. By July 1969, over 1,000 sex offenders have been questioned, and authorities checked out over 800 tips. They offered more than $40,000, which in today's money would be roughly about $340,547, in reward money for the information on the murderer. In desperation, they even consulted an internationally renowned psychic, Peter Hurkos, who claims he got his psychic powers after falling off a ladder in 1941. Hurkos fell 4 stories, spent 3 days in a coma, and claims he woke up with ESP, extrasensory precipitation, and claims that he has an accuracy of 85%. In 1964, we're going a little bit back, but just hear me out. In 1964, Hurkos injected himself into the Boston Strangler case. He was not asked to help. He harassed an innocent man who had to be institutionalized after. Hurkos was pretending to be a police investigator. He was arrested and he would be charged if he didn't leave town. He proclaimed that Albert DeSalvo was innocent. If you don't know, he murdered 13 women in Boston, Massachusetts. Albert DeSalvo. He confessed to being the Boston Strangler. On July 21st, 1969, Hurkos lands at Detroit Metro Airport. Getting off the plane, he said, "The killer knows I come for him, and I get him, maybe he comes for me, so Hurkos is not afraid." Here's a side note, because I wasn't going to add this, but I felt like to give you a little bit sense of Hurkos' character, this needed to be added. Hurkos was on crutches because he recently injured his leg. Once he was in the hotel room, only visible to Archie Allen, the one who helped get him here for the case and everything, and Ed Silver, his assistant, Hurkos threw down his crutches and walked around the suite normally. So if that doesn't tell you what type of character he is, I'm not quite sure what will, but take that with what you want. Take a psychic with a grain of salt. You take a psychic how you want to take a psychic. Hurkos proclaimed that the murderer had blonde hair and other times said it was brown. Described him as 5'5" or weighing 5'6", 140 pounds. Side note, because we know Collins is the killer, Collins was 6 foot and 180 pounds with brown hair. Hurkos also said the killer drove a motorbike and went to school at night. He was also associated in some ways with the trailer. Hurkos was coming up empty and he wanted to handle evidence, which he cannot. He was just seeming to be wasting police's time and money. So a lot of different sources said the exact same thing what Peter Hurkos said about the investigation, and I don't find this to necessarily be true because they're literally word for word, like, so one person must have just said it and everyone rolled with it, but a lot of sources said that Hurkos predicted the murderer was a strongly built white male under 25 years of age. He was born outside the United States. He rode a motorcycle, and he revealed details of the murder to the police that had not been previously released. He also predicted the killer would strike again one more time soon. The reason I don't think this is necessarily accurate, one, because like I said, everybody's literally saying the exact same thing. Two, I couldn't find the details that Hurkos brought to the police that the police knew that nobody else knew. You know, that would eventually come up in an article or something of someone. He'd be like, yeah, I knew that, she was stabbed right in the chest, and everybody else knows that she was just stabbed like 30 times. You know what I mean? Like, he would have came out with that information, I feel like, to prove that he knew. With his predictions, it's almost literally an exact prediction. Born out of the United States, he's a white male, strongly built. I mean, Collins played all these sports, of course he's going to be strongly built. He was the age, like, a young college student. I mean, so, it just, I feel it is too much of a coincidence there. Anyways, take a psychic with a grain of salt. I digress, going back to the story. On July 23rd, 1969, the campus police at Eastern Michigan University received a missing persons report from Sherry Green. She'd reported that her roommate, Karen Sue Beineman, an 18-year-old student, had failed to appear at dinner or in her room after curfew. Ypsilanti police reacted immediately and learned that Karen was due to pick up a wig from a downtown wig store, where she was last seen heading. Karen Sue Beineman was born on February 10th, 1951 in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Karen was a lively and vivacious 18-year-old graduate of Christian High School in Grand Rapids, Michigan. She was a freshman at EMU, eager to start a career in special education. She wanted to make up a difference in handicapped children. A high school friend said Karen was a shrewd thinker and a sensible girl, but she was gullible and trusted people. On July 22nd, 1969, Karen writes a letter home saying, "Don't worry, I'm careful," assuring her parents that she was aware of the dangers and included an article of the murders warning the co-eds to be cautious. On July 23rd, 1969, Karen was eating lunch with her roommate Sherry and asked if she wanted to go to the wig shop with her. Sherry said no, she needed to study. Another roommate of Karen's, Kay Ann Knowles, last saw Karen leaving lunch, walking towards the wig shop. That afternoon, Karen was leaving Wigs by Joan, picking up her hairpiece, and talking to the manager. She said she did two foolish things that day: buying a hairpiece and accepting a ride from a stranger. The employees tried to tell Karen not to get back on the bike with the man, as she fit the victim profile: petite, brunette, and had her ears pierced. They said it looked as she was telling the man no, but he must have persuaded her to get back on, and he drove off, and that was the last time Karen was seen alive. Karen didn't show up for dinner, nor did she show up for curfew at 11 p.m. At 11:15, Sherry Green, her roommate, reported her missing to the EMU campus, and then they reported it to the Ypsilanti police. The employees at Wigs by Joan described Karen wearing a blue and white strapped sleeveless top with some cut-off blue jeans and leather sandals. They remembered her so well because, well, obviously the stranger and, the motorcycle, her two foolish comments. They described a young man on a flashy blue motorcycle wearing a green and yellow striped t-shirt, appeared to be in his early 20s, nice build, 6 feet tall, clean cut, with short brown hair. The one employee thought the motorcycle was a Honda 450 with a square mirror on the handlebar. Finally, something the police can go off: a description of the suspect in a vehicle. Police went searching for this Honda 450 only to find out that wasn't even the make or model that Karen was last seen on. The police went back to the wig shop, and next to the Wigs by Joan was the chocolate shop, where an employee there knew a lot about bikes. She had said that the motorcycle was a blue British-built Triumph with lots of chrome. A composite sketch was made and then printed in the papers. Someone thought it looked like John Norman Collins, the one who got kicked out of Theta Chi. Another woman said he stopped her and offered her a ride on his motorcycle and described it as a blue bike with lots of chrome. She said it was a guy wearing a green striped shirt with cut-off shorts, and had dark brown hair but was much straighter than the composite sketch. No accent was present, and he was very good looking. When the police showed her a photo, she verified that was the guy who stopped her. It was John Norman Collins. Note, the police showed the woman from the wig shop pictures of John, and neither could confirm that was the man that they saw Karen getting on the bike with. On July 26th, while on a walk, a doctor and his wife found Karen's body in a wooded gully, which I honestly didn't know what a gully was. It's a ravine formed by the action of water. They found the body off the Riverside Drive in Chalmers near the Huron River in Ann Arbor Township. It looked as if the body had been pushed down the embankment. Karen's face was badly beaten. She was strangled. Her upper body from her neck, shoulders, breasts, and stomach were scalded in some sort of liquid, which she was also forced to ingest, and she was muffled with a section of cloth. She had some lacerations inflicted, being so severe that sections of her skin have been removed. Karen received extensive skull and brain injuries that came from a blunt object. That object was never found. Karen's torn underwear were wadded up and stuffed into her vagina, and the cops found the garment to be covered with 509 short, mostly blonde hair clippings. They measured less than 3/8 of an inch and did not belong to the victim, who had dark brown hair. Along with the presence of human semen, she had been either raped while dying or right after. There was a definite pattern to the killer's choice in victim. Usually walking alone, they accepted a ride and disappears. All girls were white, brunette, and murdered in rainy weather. Keeping in mind that the killer eventually would return to the scene of the crime in the prior murders. Maybe it was for sexual pleasure. Ugh. Maybe it was just to reminisce of his crimes that he had committed. I'm not entirely sure, but either way, the police assumed the killer would return to Karen's body. Since the body was sheltered in a wooded gully, this time Sheriff Harvey was successful in keeping the discovery out of the news. He had tried twice before, but the news was ahead of him. He ordered a stakeout because he knew that the killer would most likely come back to the body. A prosecutor said he had to replace the body with a mannequin. They got one from the JCPenney's at the Arborland Mall. That night, it rained a heavy humid storm. Diminishing visibility was swarming with mosquitoes. And at 12:15 the following morning, when a deputy spotted a jogger stopped by the mannequin, he tried to radio a description to the others. But his walkie-talkie ultimately failed due to the rain making it inoperable. The sound of a car engine told them that whoever that was got away. Public outcry when they heard that the police let the killer get away. One student said, "We're not talking about the creatures of the Black Lagoon. We're talking about a smooth guy or guys who can pick up girls, take them somewhere, and kill them." On July 27, 1969, the chief assistant prosecutor insisted that John Norman Collins be put under 24-hour surveillance, but not to be picked up until they had learned more or he was caught in a crime. Police tried to stake out his house, but his roommates caught him and told him that John was at his mother's house in Centerline. With that information, Centerline police was asked to survey his mom's house, where they found John deep cleaning a silver Oldsmobile Cutlass inside and out, the trunk included. The police arrested him due to him being a flight risk, but were not informed of the no pickup yet. 2 hours of interrogation, and John agreed to take a polygraph test in the morning. Collins got a lawyer, Robert Francis, who advised Collins not to take the test and told the police to either release his client or charge him. He was released. And that's when the governor of Michigan, William Milliken, asked the FBI for assistance. Even though 7 women had been murdered, the FBI had no jurisdiction since no federal laws were broken. Milliken ordered the Michigan State Police to take over. One in particular, State Police Corporal David Light, will play an important role on the arrest of John Norman Collins, getting California involved. In June of 1969, Collins traveled with his escapade buddy Andrew Manuel to California. Collins was driving his mother's new 1968 silver Oldsmobile Cutlass, pulling a 17-foot rented house trailer that was paid for with a stolen check, and the ID that was provided was stolen. Roxie Ann Phillips was born March 21st, 1952 in New Mexico, but moved to Milwaukee, Oregon. Roxie was a 17-year-old girl who played the violin and sang in the church choir. She was active in high school, was popular, and a good student. Roxie lived in Milwaukee with her mother. She was more than ecstatic when given the chance to babysit for the Kunis family and visit her friends in Salina, California. On June 30th, Roxie was going to mail a letter and visit her friend, Nancy Albrecht. Roxie told Mrs. Kunis that she'd return by 4 p.m. to watch the children. Roxie got as far as mailing the letter. By 7 p.m., she was reported missing. Roxie was last seen wearing a red short pant dress with white small floral design with a matching fabric belt, full sleeves with white cuffs, a white collar, and white sandals. She was carrying a large straw tote bag. She never made it to visit Nancy. That evening, an eyewitness saw Roxie get into a silver gray Oldsmobile Cutlass with Michigan plates, speeding away, running a red light, and making a hard right. When interviewing Nancy on July 18th, she said that she last saw Roxie at the Kunis home on June 29th, the day before she disappeared. Nancy said as she walked home, a white male in his early 20s with short brown hair, wearing Levi jeans and a t-shirt, pulled up in a flashy silver car with Michigan plates. He said his name was John and he was studying to be an elementary teacher, and that him and a friend pulled a trailer all the way from Michigan. John then asked Nancy on a date for the next day. When John dropped her off at home, Nancy called Roxie to tell her all about the guy that she had met. The next day, John and Roxie went missing. Nancy never got her date. I would say Nancy got off lucky in this situation, and unfortunately, Roxie got the very short end of the stick. Roxie's body was found on July 13th, 1969 by 2 boys who were looking for fossils just north of Carmel. Just north of Carmel, California. Is it Carmel or Caramel? Carmel? Caramel. I don't know. Carmel, California. Roxie's nude body was badly decomposed, only wearing her sandals. She had been strangled with her own red and white belt that was still wrapped tight around her neck. One of her earrings was missing. Her body had to have been carried where it was found and placed in a patch of poison oak. One of the investigators came in contact with a bad case of poison oak. He assumed that the killer did also. It was a long shot, but he asked around the hospitals if anybody had been treated recently with a case of poison oak that matched John's description. They were in luck. Mr. Collins was treated for poison oak. I'm not entirely sure where to add this one, but another victim that was at first alleged to be John Norman Collins was Eileen Adams. She was 13 from Toledo, Ohio, and like I said, was thought to be Collins' 9th victim, but it was cleared, and her story, as awful and horrible and tremendous as all these other girls that we are talking about today, hers it needs a video on its own. That one's hard That was a hard pill to swallow. The home of Michigan State Police Corporal David Like. Remember him? We mentioned him earlier. He returned home from a family trip. Before leaving for vacation, David's wife, sister of Loretta, mother of John Collins, gave their kids a haircut. She quickly swept up their hair and tossed it away. And keep in mind, she quickly did it. They had left their nephew to watch their dog, but he was only allowed to be in the garage. Although he did have a key to the house, but there was no reason for him to go in there, as he was just to watch the dog that was kept in the garage. When they returned home, David discovered black paint splashed across his basement floor and noticed that a can of spray paint that he had left in the basement was missing. His wife said that a box of detergent and a bottle of ammonia were also missing. When questioned by Like and his wife, John Collins denies it all. Later that evening, Like and another police officer scraped the black paint and assumed the brown, sticky substance to be blood. Side note, that was actually to be found vinyl finish. When searching for evidence, they found several blood spots on its shirt, friction marks on a copper pipe above and at the bottom of the floor joist which showed somebody possibly being tied up, hanging from, a copper pipe. A lab expert noticed hundreds of hair clippings underneath the washer. He gathered some from the basement and compared it to the ones already at the lab. The cord marks on the victim's wrists matched the electrical cord found in the Like basement. The hairs found in the basement were found to be that of the same that were stuffed into Karen Beineman's vagina. John Collins was picked up on July 31st, 1969 by his uncle Like and 2 other officers. Police wanted to fingerprint him and take his pictures, but his attorney said no, that they could only question him since he hasn't been booked. While waiting for physical evidence, they were searching the impounded silver Oldsmobile Collins drove to California. John and his attorney were about to leave when the police got the arrest warrant and arrested Collins right there. Michigan State Police shared their information about evidence that they found in John's vehicle after he was arrested for Karen Beineman's murder. They found blood on the front seat and seatbelt. The seat was removed and taken in for examination. The blood was determined to be human type O. This was before DNA positive identification, so they could just tell you what type of blood it was. Under the seat found was a small piece of red fabric the size of a dime. Salinas police gave a sample from the fabric found in John's car to a scientist, and he was able to compare it to the belt that was removed from Roxy's throat. Both samples were to be from the same cotton, they were woven the same way, and had the same dye, and the white floral pattern was the same size. Collins' car linked Roxy to him with physical evidence with the fabric. They also had found 22 pubic hairs on a brown sweater taken from Collins' closet. They didn't match any of the other victims. By now, Roxy was buried and had to be exhumed to get public hair samples, fingerprints, and blood evidence. Found by microscopic examination, the hairs found on Collins' sweater were to be similar in every way to the ones on Roxy's body. Collins' case was the most expensive and longest criminal trial in Washtenaw County history at the time. On August 1st, 1969, Collins was formally arraigned for the murder of Karen Sue Beineman, held without bond. Witness selection took nearly 2 weeks. The prosecutor, William F. Deli, focused only on the murder of Karen Sue Beineman. On August 12, 1969, Richard Ryan was appointed to represent John Collins. On August 14th, it was Collins' first pretrial. After hearing 9 prosecution witnesses in 6 hours, Collins was formally ordered to stand trial for the murder of Karen Sue Beineman. In September, at the second hearing, after 6 witness testimonies, which Ryan tried to get dismissed due to lack of evidence, waiting for an impartial jury to decide if the lack of evidence claim should be thrown out or not. On August 14th, the judge threw out the claims, and the Collins had a trial date set for June 1st, 1970, for first-degree murder in the wrongful death of Karen Sue Beineman. Richard Ryan had his doubts on Collins and asked for an off-the-record polygraph test. Collins accepted, and they went across the street to the courthouse from the jail. On that walk, he was visibly shaken, crying, and nervous. Ryan would like to talk to Collins in private before the polygraph test. After about an hour, he said, "Take him back to jail." The polygraph test is canceled and suggested a change in defense testimony to a diminished capacity plea. I struggle over that word. I had no idea what that meant, but basically, even though they broke the law, they should not be held fully criminally liable for doing so. Their mental functions were diminished or impaired, aka the insanity plea. That being said, Collins' mother was outraged and fired him immediately. Replaced with a more expensive duo, Neil Fink and Joseph Lewisell, partners at one of the Detroit's highest-priced law firms in January 1970. On June 2nd, the trial began and they needed to find a jury. With all the media, it was hard to find people on the jury. Jury selection took 5 long weeks in examining 294 people. On July 9th, the judge finally had a jury, 7 men and 7 women. The trial was set for August 14, 1970, 1 year and 22 days after the disappearance of Karen Sue Beineman. Michigan's most public and expensive case went to the people of Michigan. Public health employee Curtis Fluker had matched the type A blood found in the Likes basement to the same type blood taken from the victim. Although he had failed to do more sophisticated tests for subtyping, Walter Holtz, a chemist, testified that the hairs found in Karen's underwear were identical to those found on the floor of the Likes basement. Let me tell you, reading this trial was an interesting one. They had 47 witnesses witnesses to appear for the prosecution for the trial. 5 defense witnesses for Colin. Colin's lawyers were something else too. If you want me to go further into detail, I can make a separate video, just let me know, but we're still gonna go into some detail. On August 13th, 1970, both prosecutors and defense attorneys delivered their closing arguments to the jury. Colin's lawyers both had their own closing arguments, describing Collins as a young victim of circumstance and the evidence presented as fuzzy allegations. August 14th, Judge Conlin told the jury that they had only 2 choices for the verdict: guilty of first-degree murder or not guilty. The death sentence was not an option, as Michigan had abolished the death penalty for murder in 1846, the first state to abolish the death penalty, but not constitutionally. It wasn't constitutionally banned until 1963. Side note. Remembering that this was still in the 1970s, this was about to be the longest seated jury in Washtenaw County judicial history. On August 19th, 1970, after deliberating for 27 hours over 3 days and an additional 5.5 hours to re-listen to portions of testimonies, the jury brought in a unanimous verdict: guilty of first-degree murder of Karen Sue Beineman. Collins didn't speak at his trial, nor did he show any emotions when the verdict was read. His mother, who attended every single day, and his sister cried as they left the courtroom. On August 28th, Collins was formally sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of parole, with hard labor and solitary confinement at the Jackson State Prison. After sentencing, Collins decided to speak. It was his first public comment since his arrest. In a dramatic last-ditch appeal to the public, the former EMU student stood up in court and calmly addressed Judge John Conlin. "Your Honor, I have 2 things to say. I think they, the jury, conscientiously tried to give me a fair trial. The jury did not take its task lightly, but I think things were blown out of proportion. The circumstance surrounding the case prevented me from getting a fair trial. It was the travesty of justice that took place in the courtroom. I hope someday it will be corrected. Second, I never knew Karen Sue Beineman. I never had a conversation with her. I never took her to a wig shop. I never took her to my uncle's home. I never took her life." Later on, Collins was adamant about not killing Dawn Basom since she was a baby. Collins tried to appeal this verdict on December 14th, 1970, and it was denied on October 24th, 1972. And between 1972 and 1976, Collins appealed his conviction 4 more times, all denied. So now we're going to go back to California really quick. On October 8th, 1970, the Monterey County Prosecution Office, signed by Governor Ronald Reagan, airmailed to Governor William Milliken a request to formally extradite Collins to answer for a grand jury for the murder and wrongful death of Roxy and Phillips. Governor Milliken was going to extradite Collins with the conditions that California pay the cost, and after his trial, he be returned to Michigan to finish out his life sentence. Although Collins didn't get parole, he could be pardoned by a future governor after 20 years. Case law in California said that if a convict was extradited, it was considered an act of clemency, basically meaning it's possible for the state of Michigan to never see John Collins again. And if John was found not guilty in California, he'd be a free man. On January 20th, 1971, Collins' lawyer Fink asked for an extraditional hearing, which was held at the Jackson State Prison, closed to the public and press. The hearing began and lasted only 10 minutes in February. Fink insisted that Collins was being denied due process. It was denied and the hearing was closed. On March 5th, 1971, a federal judge denied Collins' claims. 4 months later, California basically said that they have too many murders to try and catch, and they don't want another one on their plate. June 10th, Governor Reagan said that the extradition should be halted. With 2 appeals, it would be inappropriate to remove Collins from Michigan. January 4th, 1972, Lansing said the California request to extradite of John Norman Collins for the murder of Roxy and Phillips is closed and will not be reopened. John was never convicted of any of the other girls. So basically, Roxy's is still, and like, they know that he did it, they had the evidence to prove it, but he's already been sentenced for life imprisonment. And let's hope a governor doesn't let him out, but you never know. John was never convicted for any of the other girls. Collins was removed from the Jackson State Prison to Marquette Branch Prison in 1977 due to his repeated dealings in contraband and conspiring with an inmate to escape. The escape was successful, but without Collins. He had a broken foot. In January 1979, in Marquette, he'd planned another escape with 6 other inmates via tunnel, which failed. They were transferred to a more secure cell blocks. I also read that the 6 inmates were transferred to a different prison, and Collins was the only one to stay at Marquette. In 1980, John legally changed his last name to his father's, Chapman. Some sources who knew Collins said it was his desire to be associated with Mark David Chapman. Adding this in here, if you ever read about him, they still kind of continuously call him Collins because there was actually another John Chapman that he was John was getting in trouble, like Collins was getting in trouble and blaming it on the other Chapman, so they said that you have to keep your name that you were technically born with in prison, if that made any sense. I had to add that. In 1981, Collins requested a transfer to a Canadian prison with the belief that he would be released eventually. This is because Collins holds a dual citizenship, and under the Canadian law at the time, he would be eligible for release after serving 9 years. He was initially approved, but it was revoked due to public outrage. He tried to appeal the reversal, but lost. You remember Andrew Manuel, the one that John Collins, his little escapade partner, he went to California with? Well, he was formally charged for stealing the trailer, and his bond was set at $7,500. And upon searching him, they found a diamond ring valued at $500 in his pocket. Turned out to be a stolen ring from an apartment that he recently just broke into. Another $7,500 bond was set. In today's money, the $7,500 bond would be about $54,000. So he was at like a $100,000 bond. In August 1990, Collins was transferred to the Iona Correctional Facility, but was later returned to Marquette Prison, where he remains to this day. On November 25th, 2004, more than 35 years after these murders, a new development was announced in the Ann Arbor News and the Associated Press. The lab found DNA on Jane's pantyhose. Now in 2004, we have a match. Well, it's 2022, but still. He was a registered retired nurse, a husband of 28 years, and a father of 2 grown children. Gary Earl Litterman, 62, from Globes, Michigan, was charged with 1 count of murder of the death of Jane Louise Mixer, a 23-year-old University of Michigan law student, on July 11th, 2005. And under Michigan law, his sentence is mandatory, life in prison with no possibility of parole. He passed away at the age of 76 on July 4th. 2019. The murders of the other 6 girls remain officially unsolved. In 2019, in an interview with Collins, he still continues to deny his guilt. Quote, "I felt something obligated to at least give you a brief response since you have been kind of a pain in the ass with your persistence. LOL." The motive. At least this is what they think the motive is, since John never really ever said much. The motive is that he dated a lot of females. He was oversexed in the 1967, meaning like a lot of women wanted him, like wanted to date him and everything. He is prone to rage into bondage, and it's alleged that he murdered them because when they were on their period, he tried to assault them, but he's disgusted by that. So some little facts I found, just kind of, I don't know, I'm throwing them in here. Dawn's house is now a college rental. John's home is now a sorority full of girls, and the house where Karen was tortured and murdered is still there. That is all I have for you guys today. Let me know down in the comments below all your thoughts, theories, and opinions. Do you think Collins did a majority of these murders? The ones that there was, I already told you the one of Jane Louise Mixer was already convicted. Of somebody else who did it is proven, everything. But do you think he did the other ones? Do you really think that he killed the little 13-year-old girl? I kinda do. Because it said that she looked older for her age. Anyway, let me know all your thoughts, theories, and opinions. Have you guys also heard of John Norman Collins before? Because I honestly have not. I was actually going to start a series. I might still do it, but it was going to be the first serial killer of each state. And so when I typed in Michigan, because I'm from Michigan, if you do not know, Michigan is my hometown. I know the areas not too well, but like upon searching, like I was trying to find the first serial killer in Michigan. John Norman Collins was the first one that came up, but according to the FBI, he's technically not a serial killer since he was not convicted or proven to have killed any of the other girls. So that series is not part of this one, but I don't know. If I should do that series, let me know down in the comments below. If you guys enjoyed this case coverage, make sure you give the video a thumbs up. It does help me out tremendously. It's also a free way to show your support for the channel. And if you enjoy true crime videos and also vlogging, because we are building a tiny house, so we do kind of both over here on this channel, some vlogging style content and true crime. Make sure you go ahead and subscribe to the channel and hit that little notification bell because you're not going to want to miss any of the episodes. And on that note, I will see you guys in my next video. And if you would like to check out the building of the tiny house, you can go ahead and click the I, or down in the description box there will be something. I love you guys. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and I will catch you in the next one. Bye!